and inshallah we're ready to bi'idhnillah begin
Inshallah.
whenever you are.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم لا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم الحمد لله رب العالمين وصلى الله على سيدنا ونبينا أبي القاسم المصطفى محمد
اللهم صل على محمد وعلى محمد
وآله الطيبين الطاهرين لا سيما بقية الله في الأرض اللهم أخرجني من ظلمات الوهم وأكرمني بنور الفهم اللهم افتح علينا أبواب رحمتك وانشر علينا خزائن علومك برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين. Alhamdulillah, we have tawfiq to continue our study of 40 Hadith. We are at the very last part of the book, Hadith 40, and the very last part of Hadith 40 is about the verses at the beginning of Surat Al-Hadid. So there are very important discussions by Imam Khomeini about these 6 verses at the beginning of Surat Al-Hadid, and there are lots of ideas here, plus lots of ideas he mentions, and he says that Urafa have much to say about them, but he says we don't have enough of a space here, enough of time here. But it's interesting that it shows how deep is the range of the topics that they discuss. So first I recited the first 6 verses of Surah Al-Hadid. Surah Al-Hadid, as you know, is chapter 57. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Sabbaha lillah ma fi as-samawati wal-ard wa huwa al-azizul hakim. We have a discussion about Bismillah here again, but because we said this already for Surah Qul Huwallah, is very little discussion here. Then discussion about Tasbih, inshallah we will talk about it. Sabbaha lillah ma fi as-samawati wal-ard wa huwa al-azizul hakim. Lahu mulku as-samawati wal-ard yuhyi wa yumit wa huwa ala kulli shay'in qadir. The discussion about mulk and Malikiyah of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and his rahmah, and that which one connects to ihya, which one connects to imata. هو الأول والآخر والظاهر والباطن وهو بكل شيء عليم. Imam Khomeini is very excited about this ayah number 3, full of appreciation and joy about this ayah, and you will see that he has exceptional words about this verse 3. Although he says all these 6 verses are very important, but he takes this one to be still even greater. هو الذي خلق السماوات والأرض في 6 أيام ثم استوى على العرش يعلم ما يلج في الأرض وما يخرج منها وما ينزل من السماء وما يعرج فيها وهو معكم أينما كنتم والله بما تعملون بصير. له ملك السماوات والأرض وإلى الله ترجع الأمور يولج الليل في النهار ويولج النهار في الليل وهو عليم بذات الصدور. These 6 verses are his topic for today and maybe next session. So about the first ayah, he says the first ayah indicates the fact that all beings, not all human beings, all living beings like animals or plants, no, all beings, anything that you can call it a being, is doing tasbih, because it says sabbaha lillah ma fi samawati, whatever is in the skies and the earth is ma is not exclusive to those who have aql. If it was man normally is used for uqala, but ma is for everything. So it indicates that everything, even plants, even non-living beings like water, soil, stone, all do tasbih. And he says, if someone wants to exclude those who are not aqil and say only uqala do tasbih, he says this is not acceptable. And those who are too rational and their rationality is not trained and is not stretched and it's not expanded with Quranic ideas, Irfani ideas, they may say it's only uqala who can do tasbih. But he says no. He says even if for this ayah you do ta'wil and you say it means uqala, what do you do about some other verses of the Quran? For example, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, أَلَمْ تَرَ أَنَّ اللَّهَ يَسْجُدُ لَهُ مَنْ فِي السَّمَاوَاتِ وَمَنْ فِي الْأَرْضِ وَالشَّمْسُ وَالْقَمَرُ وَالنُّجُومُ وَالْجِبَالُ وَالشَّجَرُ وَالدَّوَابُ وَكَثِيرٌ مِنَ النَّاسِ. Surat Hajj verse 18. If you say tasbih is takwini and not necessarily by really doing tasbih, it means that their existence, their being, for a person who is able to analyze their being and their dependence on God, is doing tasbih, but in a existential way, not that they actually do tasbih like human beings. He says if you do such kind of interpretations and ta'wilat, justifications for the first ayah from Surat Al-Hadid, what do you do about this ayah from Surat Al-Hajj, which talks about sajda and says they do sajda? And he says our sources like Quran, Hadith, plus what we can find from philosophy, from Irfan, would suggest that, or not only suggest, would indicate that it's real tasbih. And he says it's surprising how Hakim Buzurg wa Danishmand Kabir, a great scholar and great person who is equipped with the knowledge of hikmah, like Sadrul Muta'allihin, he believes that this tasbih is not by saying, is not by uttering, is not nutqi, is not linguistic. He says, Mullah Sadra says that if some beings who have no life, like sands, if sands do tasbih, please listen very carefully. He says, از قبیل انشاء نفس مقدس ولی اصوات و الفاظ را بر طبق احوال آنها می‌داند. Means that if Rasulullah holds these sands in his hand and those sands makes sound of tasbih, he says it is the soul of wali of Allah, in this case prophet, that is creating the sound of tasbih coming from sands. Not that sands are really doing tasbih like us in a linguistic way. And he says to say that all beings, they have life and they can talk, Mullah Sadra says this idea is not acceptable. But Imam Khomeini says, actually, according to the principles of Mullah Sadra himself in transcendent philosophy, we have to accept this, and it's very easily understandable. There is no false and unaccepted implication, and indeed it is very much needed. But he says we have to expand this discussion, and it's not the place right now. But briefly, we had this discussion before, earlier in the book, that wujud, existence, always comes with understanding and will and power, and therefore life. Any kind of being has life. Sometimes this life is very strong and we can witness it, we can notice it. Sometimes it's not understandable for us. But any being has life. Even they say, people like Ibn Arabi, they say every being has love. Sarayan al-ishq fi jami' al-alam. They believe that everything has life. And they say if something has no knowledge and no life at all, it cannot exist. Imam Khomeini says if you understand asalatul wujud, primordiality of existence, this is one of the principles in transcendent philosophy, and ishtirak ma'nawiya wujud, that the concept of being is equivocal. It can be used in the same sense for different types of being. The concept of wujud, when it is used for a human being, al-insanu mawjudun, or al-haywanu mawjudun, or al-shajaru mawjudun, or even wajibul wujud mawjudun, the concept of mawjud is the same. The concept, not the haqiqah, not the reality. The concept is the same. It's the same concept used for all. Mushtarak ma'nawi. So if you accept mushtarak ma'nawi, and if you accept that wujud has primordiality, wujud has degrees, tashkikul wujud, then we can say all of them must share something which is existence, and they must differ in again existence. Ma bihil ishtirak is the same as ma bihil ikhtilaf. In wujud they are the same, they share, and in wujud they differ, because there's nothing other than wujud. Therefore, it's a matter of degree. Those who are in higher degrees of existence, their perfections are more, their knowledge is more visible, their power is more visible, their irada is more visible. But even the lowest ones have these things. And he says if someone can taste with irfan, if you have irfani taste of these principles that Mullah Sadra says, asalatul wujud and ishtirak ma'nawi, then you would realize that hayat and life is spread all over, the same as knowledge, the same as irada. And also if you are able to have riyazat ma'nawi, with spiritual exercises and self, training and self-disciplining, if you have those type of spirituality, then you can actually witness there is huge noise of all beings doing tasbih and taqdis. You can witness that. Unfortunately, now we are somehow drunk by being in this nature, in this dunya. It has affected our understanding, and it's like someone who has taken lots of medicine. Sometimes when you take lots of medicine, you are awake, but you are not very alert. Or when you are very sleepy or very tired, you are awake, but you are not that much understanding what is said, what should you do, It's a kind of drunkenness, a kind of being sleepy. So he says, dunya has done this with us. Our eyes, our ears are not able to understand properly. And there is hijab between us and these things. even our nafs, it's, herself is hijab. Today actually in Liqa'ullah, we were talking about how to remove hijab of nafs, and we talked also last week about this. So it's interesting. He also says nafs herself is hijab. But he says something, Imam Khomeini was very much repeating this, and he was very, I think, much suffering from such people. He says the worst hijab is inkar, is to deny. Many times he used to say, if you don't understand irfani things, don't deny, just put it as a possibility. He says, از تمام حجاب ها سخت‌تر حجاب انکار. This is very bad, because if you deny, then you close the chance of understanding later. And he said, for us the best thing is to submit ourselves to the Quran, to the Hadith, and don't try to interpret it by ourselves differently. He says, suppose for tasbih you say it's not a linguistic tasbih. What about, for example, these verses? When Quran attributes understanding and life to insects, for example, in Surat Naml, verse 18. قالت نملة يا أيها النمل ادخلوا مساكنكم لا يحطمنكم سليمان وجنوده وهم لا يشعرون. One ant started talking and calling other ants that go to your houses, so that Suleiman and his army would not destroy you when or while they don't understand. You are very little, they may not see you, and they may, just pass by and you might get killed. So this Namla is talking. Yes, you can do ta'wil, but as much as possible we should keep al-ma'na al-zahiri as much as possible. Or for example, Hudhud, who brought a piece of news for Prophet Suleiman, and there is conversation between Prophet Suleiman and Hudhud. And there are many things like this. How you want to do ta'wil and to explain all these things differently. And then he says, bil jumle, as a result, the conclusion, سرایان حیات و تسبیح شعوری علمی اشیا. So the fact that life is spread all over the world of existence, and everything is doing tasbih with understanding, and it's shu'uri, means they understand, they perceive. He says this is one of the necessary things to accept in high philosophy, and people who believe in religions, people who are involved in irfan, they all accept this. And then he says the way every being is doing tasbih and their own invocations and adhkar are different. Human beings have dhikr jami'. Human beings can do comprehensive dhikr. Not that others cannot do dhikr at all. Yes, they cannot do dhikr like human beings. I mean, other beings in this physical world, natural world. I'm not talking about angels. But maybe even angels don't have that capacity that human beings have. So every being, depending on their own situation, their own realm, they have their own dhikr. And he says, in the discussion about Asma'ullah, we learn these things, but the details are something that only awliya kummal, those urafa who have reached end of their journey, they can understand. Then he says, okay, now after talking about this tasbih, we said Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim, Sabbaha lillah ma fis samawati wa ma fil ard. He says, as we said before, Bismillah in every surah belongs to that surah. Not that we just say, I begin with Bismillah ar-Rahman, Abtadi'u Bismillah. No, it depends on each surah and relates to the content of that surah. For example, here is Sabbaha lillah, means Bismillah Sabbaha lillah ma fis samawat, which means their tasbih is originating from ism of God. So it shows that tafweez is wrong, to say that Allah delegated everything, for example, to human beings and some creatures maybe who have free will. No, still Allah is involved and they are also involved, both. So Allah has given ability to them and chance to them to do tasbih, but he is himself involved. And then he says, if it was not because I'm afraid that this discussion may take long time, I would talk about reality of tasbih and how tasbih requires hamd and praising. Many times we say nusabbihu bihamdik, we bring tasbih and hamd, and that any person who is doing tasbih, any person who is praising something is doing tasbih of Allah and praising Allah, because they all come from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the first place. And then about tasbih and tahmid for the name of God. And then why here it says Al-Aziz Al-Hakim, Sabbaha lillah ma fis samawati wal ard wa huwa al-Azizul Hakim. He says, if we had time, I would have expanded on this. Also Aziz and Hakim, why they are mentioned here, what is the relation between Aziz and Hakim and Allah. So there are lots of discussions here. And what is the difference between Allah in Bismillah and Allah in Sabbaha lillah? He says this is also something to discuss. And also about samawat, about ard, and different views among urafa and philosophers about this. And then about huwa, when we say Wahuwal Azizul Hakim, this huwa is different from huwa in Qul Huwallahu Ahad. He says, if we had time, we would have talked about these things according to Irfan. But here we want to be very brief. The reason he mentions these points is to say that Urafa have thought about these things and have lots of ideas to share. And we shouldn't deprive ourselves from this part of Islamic heritage by rejecting Irfan. And then he talks about the second verse, which is lahu mulku samawati wal ard yuhyi wa yumit wa huwa ala kulli shay'in qadir. I think maybe we leave this for next session because we started late, and inshallah verses 2 to 6 we have to discuss to finish the book bi'idhnillah. Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen.
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد